Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started right here. Dear kind and merciful Father, we thank you for the opportunity to come before you once again. We ask, Lord, that you hide me behind you, that your words would be shared on high. Open our hearts and our mind that we may comprehend the vastness of this message. Give us wisdom, knowledge, and understanding from on high, in Jesus' holy name. Amen. Just want to say welcome one and all. And we continue with part 2 of digestive aches and pain, belching, burping, farting, all forms of digestive issues that are plaguing our people. Well, this section was so sweet, I did not want to end on it last night because I wanted to share a good amount concerning this topic. We are talking about eating bread which was not well baked. You know, I grew up in Antigua, and I grew up in a baker shop, so I'm very much, very well familiar with bread baking and the different things that goes on when it comes to bread. So I remember one time I was in Virginia, and while in Virginia, a good friend of mine, you know, him and his wife, they love bread baking. As a matter of fact, he basically considered himself an expert when it comes to bread baking. But what he would use, he would actually use the bread machine. And several times he baked bread and he brought it to me. But yet still, when I looked at the bread, I realized that the inner portion of the bread, the dough, was still moist. I realized that the bread was not cooked thoroughly on the inside. Well, now, saints, I got to tell you this. Remember, I told you I grew up in a bakery here in Antigua. I already knew that if you eat bread that is not properly cooked on the inside, the yeast is still alive, the yeast is still fresh, you are looking for major digestive issues. So from time to time, I would mention it to him, and what he would do, you know, I would watch him just pull out the pet or pull out the inner lining of the bread, and he says, "Yeah, ready to go." And I said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." So one of the things I realized when it comes to bread making, you need to have proper understanding in terms of making bread. And you need to know what to do, when to do, and how to do it, because not making bread properly is a major cause of many of the digestive issues our people are having today. It's a major cause of the yeast infection that our ladies are having. And then last but not least, it actually causes something called SIFO. And what is SIFO? SIFO is small intestinal fungal overgrowth. This is where you have a large amount of yeast overgrowth in the small intestine simply because of someone eating bread where the yeast is still alive, where the yeast is still fresh, where the yeast is still growing, and actually ultimately damages the stomach, causes leaky gut. Then all of a sudden it causes all different forms of gluten sensitivity and allergies, asthma, and dermatological issues, and all of these different things simply by someone actually eating fresh bread. I want to tell you that we do have a bakery here in Antigua. We give instructions. We outsource all of our material to a special bakery here in Antigua, and they make these bread according to our specification until we get the finances that we need to actually build the bakery ourselves. But we outsource our baking for now with instructions and with our ingredients. And one of the things we do, we tell our customers straight from the get-go, it takes 2 or more days before the bread can be eaten. We are the only baker shop here in Antigua that actually bake our bread and then put them in the refrigerator. You know, we sit it out as long as we can, and then we stick it in the refrigerator. And then, you know, on a daily basis, people just come and buy it out of the fridge. We're in a country here in the Caribbean where normally people just buy bread off of the shelf. But our bread, because of how we teach, people actually buy it out of the fridge. It's a little different mentality, but through education, the people are learning and have learned. And they are doing very well when it comes to digestive issues. So let's go right ahead with our screen. It says, if the inside can be squeezed into a dough, do not eat it. Bread which is 2 or 3 days old is more helpful than new bread. Hot raised bread of any kind is difficult of digestion. So as you can see here, anytime you can realize that the pet is soft and pliable, it's breeding ground for small intestinal fungal overgrowth, and we recommend that you do not eat it because you ultimately will have issues down the road. Okay, let's continue. The use of baking soda or baking powder. Baking soda or baking powder in bread, pastries, cakes, desserts, or other items are harmful and unnecessary. These items, baking soda and baking powder, causes inflammation of the stomach and often poisons the entire system. Some people say, Brother Luke, but the one that I have does not have an aluminum in it. I said, that's great, but it still contains sodium bicarbonate. And one of the things that you got to remember, your body produces bicarbonate on its own. So whenever you introduce bicarbonate in any form into the human body, you actually disrupt the digestive process and you make it impossible for the body to break down protein, and as a result, you'll have a problem with anemia, B12 deficiency anemia. And the reason being is that the body actually needs a protein by the name of the intrinsic factor in order for you to have B12 production, okay? And if for some reason that your proteins are not properly being broken down so in that way they can be absorbed, you will have a problem with blood building mechanism, especially vitamin B12, okay? So remember, just want to add, even though it might be aluminum free, it still has bicarbonate, and bicarbonate will affect the pH of the gut and will hinder the gut from properly breaking down protein, and you will actually have major issue as a result. You'll find that you have deterioration of muscle mass, malabsorption of protein, protein not being able to properly broken down, problem with B12 absorption, problem with blood building mechanism. So it's a whole slew of things that you can ultimately run into problem when baking soda or baking powder is used in any form of food preparation. Eating milk and sugar together, as in ice cream shakes and etc. Sugar ferments quickly, yet it is enfolded in the milk, which digests slowly. Milk causes the stomach to secrete more acid. Milk and sugar clog the system, irritate the digestive organs, and affect the brain. Sugar and milk combined are liable to cause fermentation in the stomach and are thus harmful. You'll also find too that the combination of milk and sugar will cause something called oxidized cholesterol. Oxidized cholesterol is one of the things that helps with the breakage of your blood vessel. It also will cause the plaquing and damaging of your arterial wall. Now, let's go to sugar. Sugar is not good for the stomach. It causes fermentation, and this clouds the brain and and brings on peevishness into the disposition. Cakes, sweet puddings, pastries, jellies, jams are active cause of indigestion. Concentrated sugars, even good sweeteners like honey and maple syrup, should be used sparingly. Eating too much liquid food. Too much soups are unhelpful. Okay, so too much soups are what? Unhelpful. So much liquid taken into the stomach was not helpful, and that all who subsisted on such a diet placed a great tax upon the kidney, and so much watery substance debilitate, or you can say weaken, the stomach. Drinking with meals. Drinking and eating dilutes the stomach juices. Many make a mistake in drinking cold water with their meals. Food should not be washed down. Taken with meals, water diminishes the flow of saliva, and the colder the water, the greater the injury of the stomach. Now, you got to remember your body's temperature, internal temperature, is 98.6 degrees. When you alter that temperature, when you bring in new food, the body now has to take that food and get it up to the body's temperature before it can actually be used. As a matter of fact, most enzymes, in order for these enzymes to work the way they need to work, they have to get to an internal temperature, if my memory serves me right, anywhere between 93 to about 103 degrees, somewhere around that range. I may have to verify the specifics on that, but it's around that range, I know for sure. Okay, so the internal temperature has to be elevated, so in that way the enzymes will be activated to aid in the breaking down of your food. Drinking with meals, ice water or ice lemonade taken with meals will arrest digestion until the system has imparted sufficient warmth to the stomach to enable it to take up its work again. Masticate slowly and allow the saliva to mingle with the food. Water. Water that is too alkaline, or you can say water that is alkaline, period, can affect the digestive system as it keeps the pH level in the stomach too high, and foods that require an acidic stomach, such as proteins, you will have problems with. Remain in the stomach too long does cause fermentation and lead to nutritional deficiencies such as B12 deficiency, anemia, malabsorption of protein, and so forth. Okay, hot or cold. While it is advisable to take something warm in the stomach on mornings, hot drinks should be used for medicinal purposes and not in the diet. The stomach is greatly injured by a large quantity of hot food and hot drink. Thus, the throat and digestive organs, and through them the other organs of the body, are enfeebled. Hot or cold food continue. If food is cold, the vital force of the stomach is drawn upon in order to warm it before digestion can take place. Cold drinks are injurious for the same reason, while the free use of hot drinks is debilitating. However, for those who choose to have 2 meals a day, a cold drink can be used to stop the desire for a third meal. If you feel that you must eat at night, take a drink of cold water, and in the morning you'll feel much better for not having eaten at night. Eating too great a variety at a meal. Too great a variety at a meal. Keep it simple. I like the KISS principle. Keep it simple. What are we talking about? Do not have too great a variety at a meal. 3 or 4 dishes are plenty. Now, saints, listen to me. 3 or 4 dishes is not necessarily 3 or 4 kind. Okay, so keep that in mind. 3 or 4 dishes is not necessarily 3 or 4 kinds. The amount of kinds that you should have at a meal should be between 2 and 3 kinds. We will get into the explanation of this on a broader scale later on, or we did it in the My Plate presentation. So I'll give you an example. Like if I was supposed to tell you to name all of the melons, what would you say? Well, I'll give you an idea. So in that way, you know, when I say to name melons, what I'm talking about. I'm talking watermelon, honeydew, cantaloupe, marshmallow, pumpkin, zucchini, butternut, summer squash, winter squash. You know, all these items are considered melon. There is a family that the scientific name, I need to look at it. I have problems pronouncing it normally, so I'm not going to try and slaughter it as we speak right now. But technically speaking, all of those, even though they are a wide variety, from a digestive standpoint, from an enzymatic standpoint, the same enzyme to digest one is the same enzyme to digest the other. So even though you have a variety at that meal in terms of those fruits that I just mentioned, from a digestive standpoint, the human body says one kind. Many variety, but the digestive system says one kind. Let me give you one more example before I move on, because this can possibly be a very technical aspect, but with proper understanding, it makes all the difference in the world. Okay? Let me give you an example. Let's say, hypothetically, I ask you to name some cattle. Name some cattle. Okay? What would you say? Well, let's give it a try. Let's name some cattle. And when I say cattle, I'm talking ruminant animals. These are animals with 4 stomachs. So let's go. Cattle. So let's name some cattle. Cow, goat, sheep, deer, buffalo. You know, you get the image, right? You get the picture, right? There's a variety that I just mentioned, but yet still it's considered one from a digestive standpoint. I hope you understand where I was going. On a plate, the most you can put is 2 to 3 kinds. 2 to 3 kinds. Now you can have a wide variety, but even though you have a wide variety, you need to make sure you simplify the kinds from a digestive standpoint so that you get optimum health when it comes to digestion. Remember I told you about the KISS principle? Keep it simple. Do not have too great a variety at a meal. 3 or 4 dishes are a plenty. At the next meal, you can have a change. There should not be many kinds, see the word kinds there now, at any one meal, but all meals should not be composed of the same kinds of food without variation. Okay? So you see my kinds word came up. If I was supposed to take you back to the book of beginnings, that is the Bible. Where's the very first time you saw that word kinds? You see when the Lord says, animal after its kind, cattle after its kind, plants after its kind. So you understand the kind principle is where you stay within the same family, but you still get a variety. Now, we're continuing with eating too great a variety at a meal. The habit of overeating or eating too many kinds of food at one meal frequently cause dyspepsia or indigestion. Okay? So someone may go to a potluck or someone may go to a gathering. Like today, we had something called Heroes Day, and it was Taste of Vegan. And you go up and you see a wide slew of variety of foods. Now, if you don't understand how to separate and isolate and how to pick the proper kinds, you are going to run into problem, because you're going to try to take a little of this, a little of that, a little of everything, and by the end of the night, your stomach is burning, you can't done. Well, the best way to deal with that situation is to use the KISS principle. Keep it simple. Stay within the kind family. Do not go outside of 2 or 3 kinds at one meal, and you'll find that you will not have any issue with dyspepsia or indigestion, as we so frequently call it. Serious injury is thus done to the delicate digestive organs. In vain the stomach protests and appeals to the brain to reason from cause to effect. The excessive amount of food eaten or the improper combination does its injurious work. In vain do disagreeable premonitions give warning. Suffering is the consequence. Disease take the place of health. The use of vinegar. Now, saints, let me tell you something. You see this right here? I have plenty to say when it comes to vinegar. I have plenty to say. As a matter of fact, there is a specific quote by Sister White on vinegar, and I hope I have it in this slide. If not, what I'll do, I'm going to tell you what, I'll make a third part to this presentation, so in that way I can have a third part to make sure that I have that section of vinegar in my presentation. So let's get started on this vinegar aspect. I'll read the instructions first, and then I'll start giving you stories on vinegar that you can understand the seriousness of vinegar. Let's go right ahead into this one. It says here, mustard, mayonnaise, vegenaise, mayonnaise, vinegar, apple cider vinegar, ketchup, that sauce. I always have a hard time saying that sauce's name. Worcestershire sauce. Okay, please forgive me the slaughter that I would have given to that name. But you guys know the sauce name. Worcestershire sauce. Okay, you know what I mean? I'm not going to try and slaughter it anymore. I've slaughtered it multiple times in the past, and I've slaughtered it tonight again. Let's go right ahead, okay? Barbecue sauce, vinaigrette dressing. All these contain vinegar, okay? Vinegar ferments in the stomach, and the food does not digest but decays and putrefies. As a consequence, the blood is not nourished but becomes filled with impurities, and the liver and kidney difficulties appear. Now, saints, if you stop and let's reason from cause to effect. What exactly is vinegar? Vinegar is basically something called acetic acid. Vinegar is basically alcohol spoiled to the highest level, and we take it and look at it as a drink. You got to understand that when you're dealing with the food industry does not believe in wastage. So let's look at apple, for example. You know, the very best apple, those are the ones that shows up in your store. The one that may have a slight little blemish or two, those are going to make your applesauce, okay? And the ones that are spoiled, rotten, decay, whatever the situation is, those are going to make your vinegar. Don't you ever think that they use the best organic, nice, blemish-free apples for vinegar. Absolutely not. The best apples, those are going to be in your grocery store. The second best, those are going to make your applesauce. The third best, basically this one that's up to spoilage, that's going to make your vinegar. Okay, so they basically wait until that item has spoiled or fermented, and they use it for that applesauce. Now, the apple industry is celebrating. You know why? Because technically speaking, they virtually have almost zero waste. The only thing that they basically have to extract would be the seed from these items. But other than that, if you deal with apples, it's almost 100% usage that the farmers get out of apple. Now, you got to remember now that apple cider vinegar is actually alcohol. It's basically alcohol. If you ever look at the scientific name for it, you will always see it ends with a OH. OH means that it's an alcohol. Any which way you turn it, okay? If you look at it from a scientific standpoint, it ends, its scientific name, it ends with OH, which basically, literally means it's an alcohol. And, you know, as Christians, we don't drink alcohol. The Bible said wine is the mark of strong drink is raging. He that consumeth is not wise. You know, so I'm a strong believer that these items should never be ingested internally, but can be used medicinally externally. Okay, so I personally would recommend that you leave that vinegar alone. Leave that vinegar alone. Let's move on. I can show you how to make your mustard, your mayonnaise, your Vegenaise, your ketchup, your barbecue sauce. I can show you how to make all of those with lemon juice, and we take the vinegar out. We make them all the time. Take the vinegar out, put some lemon juice in there, and you say, voila. And, you know, the item tastes absolutely amazing. I remember one time I was in Georgia, and I was working with someone else, and we had given this young man some instruction, and he proceeded by sharing a story with us, saying that he was actually drinking apple cider vinegar straight. Well, lo and behold, what that vinegar did, it literally punched a hole in his gut, and while he was sitting on the toilet, when he looked down, blood was coming from his anus. He had to rush to the emergency room. It was the acetic acid that literally punched a hole straight in his gut. Another thing that you'll find about vinegar, vinegar actually causes osteoporosis, simply because it makes your bones porous. It actually also prevents the blood from being able to clot. So if someone is drinking alcohol or drinking vinegar, vinegar specifically, and they get a cut, that person can literally bleed to death, especially if they're consuming vinegar. The other thing that you run into when dealing with vinegar is that vinegar actually, you know, I did mention that it can actually prevent the blood from clotting. So if you ever get in a car accident, you can bleed to death. It actually destroys your red blood cells. It actually causes cirrhosis of the liver, destroys the kidney, poisons the blood. Now, saints, I personally would recommend that you consider leaving it alone. It is something that you can be hooked on. So you got to be mindful, because you can get hooked in vinegar. And when I get a chance and I share with you Sister White's story, you'll be amazed to see what she had to say about vinegar. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pause right here, and I'm going to make a part 3, simply because I think it is important that I put Sister White's story right here, right next up on the screen, that individuals can understand how serious of a situation it is to actually literally be using vinegar. All Christians should not be using vinegar internally, especially Seventh-day Adventist Christians. So I thought that I'll put that out there. I'm going to pause right here, and we will do part 3 next lecture that we do. So let me go right ahead, and I'll put a pause right here, and we will pick up on our next lecture time.